What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Kevin Blekicki Show in junction with the Ryan Show. I'm your host, Kevin Blekicki. This is, of course, episode number 34. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you had a great week. We have a great show for you this week. We're going to be talking about the World Series. The matchup is finally set. I'll talk about that. I will give you my preview and prediction for that series. And we also, unfortunately, have to talk about the New York Jets. They lose again, this time 13-3 to the Carolina Panthers. And somehow that wasn't even the most newsworthy thing to happen this week with the Jets. We'll get to how they embarrassed themselves yet again. But we have to start off with the Major League Baseball postseason. We had a game 7 of the ALCS on Monday night between the Seattle Mariners and the Toronto Blue Jays. Heading into that series, I had not been alive to see either of those franchises ever be in the World Series. The Mariners have never made it in their franchise's history, and the Toronto Blue Jays hadn't made it since 1993. I was born in 95, so neither of those teams have made it in my lifetime. But the game ended up going in the favor of the Blue Jays, 4-3. Absolute heartbreak for the city of Seattle. I was really looking forward to the Mariners hopefully winning that series and us getting an absolutely fire Macklemore album, but we're not going to get that. We might get another Drake album, though, which I don't think anybody wants. But this was an amazing series, and it just proved time and time again why postseason baseball is the best sport in the world. Playoff hockey, Stanley Cup playoffs, definitely up there. Interchangeable between those two, but it's definitely not the NFL playoffs, and it's sure as hell not the NBA playoffs. But this was a series that the Seattle Mariners absolutely had to have, and they had it. They had this series in their hands, in their control, and they just blew it. And if I'm a Seattle Mariners fan, I'm staying up all night just thinking about what could have been, because they easily could be facing the Dodgers in the World Series, and they should have. They were up 2-0. They won the first 2 games on the road in Toronto. They had a 2-0 series lead, and then they go back home for 3 straight at T-Mobile Park, and they weren't able to get the job done. The Blue Jays took 2 out of 3 from them. So then, even though that they lost the stretch at home 2-1, they still had a 3-2 series lead going into Toronto, and they had won the first 2 games there. And they go out with a whimper and they lose the next 2 games, including having a 3-1 game 7 lead in the 7th inning and still blowing it. Man, I would just be absolutely distraught if I was a Seattle Mariners fan right now. And you got to give a huge shout out to Toronto. They played their hearts out. They are an incredible offensive team, led, of course, by Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who won the ALCS MVP, and George Springer, who hit obviously what I'm calling the Springer Dinger. I hope everyone else acknowledges it as the Springer Dinger. It was a 3-1 deficit for the Blue Jays going into the 7th inning, and George Springer hits a go-ahead 3-run homer to give the Blue Jays a 4-3 lead, and they would eventually win the series by that margin as well. They won the series 4-3, obviously, because it being in 7 games. And it was just an amazing moment. I still feel like the crowd pop for Jose Bautista's home run was a little bit louder. But, I mean, that moment from George Springer is going to be a moment I'm never going to forget. I was watching the game. I had to step out for a bit and go to Walmart. And as I was in the Walmart parking lot after getting my groceries, I got the notification, obviously before the event happened, that he hit the home run. And then I was in the parking lot and I saw him hit that 3-run homer. I saw him screaming and jumping, and everyone in the Rogers Center going absolutely crazy. And man, that's just a moment you don't forget. I'm never gonna forget that moment. Shout out to George Springer, just a postseason absolute hero. You just got to watch out for those former Astros, man. Altuve, I mean, he's still an Astro, but he's always clutch in the postseason. George Springer, Alex Bregman had a big hit in the wild card series as a Red Sox against the Yankees. I mean, say what you want about the 27 Astros, but those guys were loaded with absolute clutch performers. So this is going to be a pretty good matchup between the Toronto Blue Jays and the Los Angeles Dodgers. And the Dodgers ended up getting to the World Series by sweeping the Brewers in the National League Championship Series. They won that series 4-0. And they got there by Shohei Ohtani putting together the best performance that I've ever seen in a single game, maybe with context included, in sports history. This was a chance for his team to go to the World Series. And Shohei Ohtani went 3 for 3 with 3 solo home runs. And then as a pitcher, went 6 shutout innings and had 10 strikeouts. Ladies and gentlemen, we're never going to see this again. This is the greatest athletic performance you'll ever see. You will never see that again unless it's by him. And we have to acknowledge how great he is. I know it's easy to hate on the Dodgers for how much money they pay their players and for them always winning, but you just have to sit back and admire just how amazing Shohei Ohtani is. He gets a lot of love. Some people might even classify it as glazing from the MLB social media networks, but I don't think that there's enough praise that you could give Shohei Ohtani for the way that he performed in that NLCS game for absolutely insane stuff. That man's throwing 100, and he hit a ball 469 feet, and he hit a ball out of Dodger Stadium. Like this guy is literally the greatest athlete I've ever seen. Now, is he the best athlete of all time? There's definitely discussions for that. You have to consider Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders, guys who have done it in both leagues. Obviously, LeBron is up there for his longevity and just how much he's dominated the league for over 20 years. But for Shohei Ohtani to do what he does at 2 separate positions is just insane. And I think this series between the Dodgers and the Blue Jays is going to be really great. A lot of people are saying that the Dodgers are just going to steamroll them. And if you think that the Dodgers are just going to steamroll the Blue Jays, then you haven't been watching the Blue Jays in the postseason, because that offense, that lineup is absolutely lethal. And I'm kind of torn on who I want to root for and who I want to support. Because on one hand, it's the Dodgers. You don't want to root for the Dodgers. I don't want to root for the Dodgers. No one outside of Dodgers fans likes the Dodgers. However, I am a Mets fan, and I'm still salty and still angry and still upset at the way that the 2022 season ended. The Mets had a 10.5 game lead, and they lost it. I wouldn't classify it as a choke or them blowing it. The Atlanta Braves just played at an absolutely unattainable pace for a couple months, and they just played a little bit better each time than the Mets. And they went down to Atlanta. They had Jacob deGrom, Max Scherzer, and Justin Verlander all go in a series in Atlanta. All they had to do was win one game, and they are division champions, and they got swept. The one thing that they couldn't do. And, so they end up going to the wild card series, playing the Padres. It's a 3-game set, all games at Citi Field. And the Padres ended up taking 2 out of 3 from the Mets at Citi Field, including that infamous Joe Musgrove ear game. And Chris Bassett was a guy who was very reliable for the Mets in the regular season, and he just didn't get the job done in the postseason. Neither did Max Scherzer. The lasting image I'll have of Max Scherzer as a Met is him getting booed off the Citi Field mound, as he rightfully should have. He was not good enough for us in the moments that we needed him to be. And then so he goes off to Texas. So does Jacob deGrom. They win the World Series in 23. Max Scherzer gets another ring after leaving the Mets. Jacob deGrom, after being one of the greatest pitchers that I've ever seen, him going to Texas, getting a ring. And now Max Scherzer is on the Blue Jays, back in the World Series, and has a chance to win 2 rings after the Mets got rid of him. And this was in the span of three seasons, 4 seasons. I mean, I'm so used to my teams having good players and them crapping the bed when they're with us and then leaving us and then doing well. This is nothing new to me, but it doesn't mean that I'm not angry. It doesn't mean that I still don't hate it. And then, not to mention, we also have to mention the fact that Andres Jimenez is also playing really well in the postseason, and he was the guy that we traded to get Francisco Lindor. Now, I'm not saying that I would not have traded for Francisco Lindor. Lindor had one of the greatest regular season home runs I've ever seen in that game in Atlanta. Also, that game against Toronto on 9/11 in 24, and he also had that iconic grand slam against the Phillies, which will forever be my favorite Mets home run of all time. The biggest one will be, of course, Pete Alonso in the wild card series, with the season and potentially his Mets career on the line. But yeah, I'm so glad that we have Francisco Lindor, but it's frustrating that Andres Jimenez, one of the guys that we traded for Francisco Lindor, would win a ring before him. So I'm definitely on the salty end of the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, we also have to take into consideration the political state of the world. America not doing too hot right now. So the Blue Jays winning the World Series at a time where I don't say like American hope or faith in the country is at an all-time low in my lifetime. That would be very funny. That would be very funny, especially since they would probably end up meeting with Trudeau in Canada and not even going to the White House. We know that the Dodgers would go to the White House and meet with Trump because they did that. But so it would be very funny to see a Canadian team win an American pastime right now. And especially this one goes out to all the people that are like, you got to root for the Dodgers because they're an American team. You can't root for Canada in the World Series. I think you guys are just a bunch of idiots. I really do. It is not that deep. I kind of that makes me want to root for the Blue Jays because people are just so pro America that they just have to root for America in every single scenario, even if it's not an international competition. I think it's very funny. So that makes me want to root for the Blue Jays. But then, you have the former Mets doing well. So there's a lot of pros and cons to it. I did end up making a list. One of the pros for the Dodgers, Shohei Ohtani getting a ring. I love Shohei Ohtani, as I mentioned. Also, if the Dodgers win, I think that leaves the opportunity open for the Mets to still be able to buy rings, because if the Dodgers are able to win, it means that buying World Series kind of help. You still got to develop the guys, but it also could lead to a lockout, which I think is going to happen either way at the end of the 2026 season, I should say. On the plus side for the Blue Jays, Vladdy Jr. gets a ring, and then that viral picture of him as a kid in an Expos uniform with his dad goes even more viral. So there's definitely pros and cons of this. I do think that the Dodgers are going to win this series in 6 games, though. So that does it for this first part of the Kevin Blekicki show. We will be back after these messages. Welcome back to the Kevin Blekicki Show. And I was going to talk about some other things, but we have to address this very important breaking news that just dropped as I'm recording this episode. We have successfully bullied the National Basketball Association into putting the Larry O'Brien NBA Finals trophy on the court for the NBA Finals games. Previously, it wasn't on the court after having been on there multiple times in years past. We just barely were able to bully them last year into just putting it digitally imposed on the court. It looked terrible, and they switched it to the finals logo, and it still looked terrible because it wasn't actually on the court. And the NBA has been having a lot of issues with a lot of things in the past couple of years, but one of the things that they definitely need to address is making the big games feel like big games. You have, stars sitting out with load management and whatnot, and then you have no real branding of the NBA finals during the game, so it feels just like a regular game. And so the fact that they're going to be painting the logo on the court, the Larry O'Brien trophy, is absolutely huge. It's great. And then you have the NBA returning to NBC. And now, TNT was great. I don't know what kind of new edition the Inside the NBA is going to look like under ESPN. I assume that it's not going to be great because everything that ESPN turns to crap. But the NBA on NBC being back definitely, brings back nostalgia. Not for me, because I'm not old enough to have remembered when the NBA was on NBC, but definitely for the people like born in the 80s and who grew up watching Michael Jordan, definitely going to be, kind of nostalgic for them. And of course, on their first broadcast, they had some technical issues with the microphones in the pregame show, but I mean, it is what it is. I'm just happy that I get to see Vince Carter on my TV again because he is my favorite basketball player of all time that I've ever rooted for. He's the reason I became a Brooklyn Nets fan, and so I'm just happy to see him in any capacity on my television. And I know it's going to be a rough season for the Nets. I might be putting their season opener game on in the background. They're playing the Charlotte Hornets. Like, I had the first game, the NBA on NBC, on in the background, and it ended up being an amazing game. It was 125 to 124 for the uh, Oklahoma City Thunder against the Houston Rockets. Kevin Durant returning to OKC and seeing them win a championship in Oklahoma City when he wasn't able to do it with him, James Harden, and Russell Westbrook. So it was, I mean, it's kind of light on storylines for me. Other than, like, I didn't really care about that angle because Kevin Durant left in 2016. He's won multiple titles, multiple finals MVPs. He's done his own thing. And like that angle, I don't really care about. But it ended up being a great game. Then you had the Warriors and Lakers. The Warriors winning by 10. Luka Doncic and Jimmy Butler putting up great performances in that one. I'm not too into the NBA. I'm more into it now that it's on NBC, and I'll get into it a little bit more. I don't know how much I'm going to talk about it on this platform because it's not the subject. It's not the sport that I follow the most. But we did have to bring up them bringing back the Larry O'Brien trophy onto the court. It's a very important moment for me. But we have other breaking news to also get to, as the Giants have hired their new manager. The San Francisco Giants have hired Tony Vitello, the former Tennessee Volunteers head coach. He is the first ever major league manager to be hired directly from college and make the jump from the college ranks to the pros. So shout out to Tony. Wish him the best. But the reason why first let's go over his resume. He had a great record as a head coach, 331 and 128, which is a 721 winning percentage. In the SEC tournament, he has a record of 13 and 6. And in the NCAA tournament, he has a record of 29-11. He won the College World Series last year. He won the SEC Coach of the Year in 2022. He won the SEC tournament in 22 and 24. He was an SEC regular season champ in 22 and 24. So this guy is a great head coach, one of the best in all of college baseball, and now he's going to be the manager of the San Francisco Giants. And I wouldn't really pay that much attention to it other than the fact that it affects the Mets. Well, it doesn't really affect the Mets, but I want it to affect the Mets. I never really was a huge fan of Carlos Mendoza. I was kind of last year. I didn't really like the decisions that he made this past season in 2025. Now that they hired Tony Vitello, which I do think is a great move, we'll see how it goes from coaching college kids to coaching millionaires who make more than you and probably don't care about you. But the reason why I'm so interested in this is I thought for sure that Bruce Bochy was going to be the manager of the Giants. I thought he was going to get a reunion. The GM of the Giants is Buster Posey, who, of course, he won those 3 World Series with him in 2010, 2012, and 2014. And I thought it was done deal. I thought it was a match made in heaven. Bruce Bochy, great manager. He also just came off a World Series championship in 2023 with the Texas Rangers, the one that I mentioned with Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer. And I thought for sure that they were going to be tied together and he was going to be their manager once again, but he's not. And now I want the Mets to fire Carlos Mendoza, and I want the Mets to get Bruce Bochy, a proven winner, a guy who's won recently, not some guy who was great in the past and you hope that he can be great in the future. He's coming off fairly recent success. I want the Mets to sign Bruce Bochy. I want them to be angry. About the way that the last season ended. I want them to be hungry, and I want them to act like 2026 is an all-in must-win year. I don't want them to leave any stone unturned. I want them to by the time that spring training starts and pitchers and catchers report, I want the Mets to believe that they have put out the best possible team that they possibly can, and they are almost guaranteed to win a World Series. And you do that by hiring Bruce Bochy as a manager, a steady hand, a veteran presence in that locker room, and a guy who has proven time and time again that he knows how to manage in the big situations. I know it's a pipe dream. I doubt that it's actually going to happen, but I need David Stearns and Steve Cohen to get the job done. I need them to call Bruce Bochy, and I need them to fire Carlos Mendoza and replace him with Bruce Bochy. Because a lot of times, everyone's like, we got to fire Carlos Mendoza. And for a lot of the time, I was not really for that because I'm like, who are we going to replace him with? There wasn't real, maybe Carlos Beltran, but I don't want to go to a first-time manager when you're trying to win a World Series. I want to bring in a guy who knows how to win a World Series, and that guy is Bruce Bochy. So the Mets better get on this, and they better sign Bruce Bochy as their next manager. But from kind of happy news to definitely depressing news, we got to talk about these freaking New York Jets. Woody Johnson is the most incompetent owner, not just in the NFL, but in all of sports. And he had the bright idea of doing an interview or some sort of, question and answer segment at some sort of owners meetings or whatever. And he gets asked about the future of this team. And his answers couldn't have possibly been worse. He literally threw pretty much everyone under the bus. He was asked about the direction of this team, and he said, "Yeah, we're not winning a whole lot of games because our offense can't throw the ball down the field." He directly threw Justin Fields under the bus. And that's insane because this was the guy that you brought in. It's not like you drafted him and he's young and he's making mistakes. Justin Fields has been in the NFL for 4 seasons. He couldn't get the job done in Chicago. They traded him to Pittsburgh. And then Pittsburgh saw what he was doing, didn't like it, and then they got rid of him. And you're surprised with the result right now? He completely threw Justin Fields under the bus in that moment. And he was saying, and he's saying he was asked if he was going to be um, moving forward with Justin Fields as the quarterback, and then he said that's not up to him. That's the coach's decision. And now you're throwing Aaron Glenn under the bus. You're saying that you trust him with the decision, but you know that Justin Fields isn't the right fit at quarterback, and then that means that everyone else can see it as well. So you believe that he's not the answer. We believe he's not the answer, but you don't have the stones or the balls or the gall to tell Aaron Glenn to bench him. And we gotta call a spade a spade. I mean, they only scored 3 points last week against the Carolina Panthers, but they scored more with Justin Fields than they did Tyrod Taylor. Now Tyrod Taylor had a really impressive throw. Only thing that it was to J.C. Horn. He threw 2 picks to J.C. Horn. So it's like this team is just a mess. I don't expect Woody Johnson to ever give a crap about this team. The people who care most about this team are the ones funneling their money into it, and it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really matter if we stop watching or supporting the team because they get most of their money from TV deals. So you can boycott all you want. You can stop going. I do recommend that you do stop showing up because there's no reason why he deserves to get extra money. But I'm sure that he's definitely confident and okay with the amount of money that he gets just from the TV deals. And this is just something that drives me insane. And, the thing that is really bothering me about this team is that, I see all these people in this Jets group chat that I'm in on Twitter, and everyone's like, oh, well, this guy Mendoza's pretty good. This guy Ty Simpson's pretty good. They're like kind of scouting these quarterbacks. Like, on Saturday, I always get, oh, good throw from this guy. Oh, this guy has good footwork, whatever. And I'm just sitting back and I'm just laughing. And I'm like, you guys are such bums. I mean, you're really paying attention to these quarterbacks. How many times has this team proven to you time and time again that they do not know how to develop quarterbacks? They did it with Mark Sanchez. Mark Sanchez ended up bringing us to back-to-back AFC championships. He didn't live up to necessarily the hype, but in retrospect, a very good quarterback for us. And then, of course, he had to end up attacking an older man and ended up getting stabbed. But, that's the way that the Jets quarterbacks are. And then you have guys like, Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, Zach Wilson, all these young guys that you're taking flyers on, and then they go to other teams, except with the exception of Zach Wilson because he just got benched. But you take a flyer on all these guys, and then they end up crapping the bed. And it's just like you expect that this team is really gonna really do anything with this quarterback because Justin Fields is not a young he still kind of is a young quarterback, but he's been in the league for a few years and he hasn't shown any significant signs of improvement. In fact, since week 1, he has regressed significantly, and you expect the Jets to draft a quarterback and develop them. Like, we're at the point where even though the Jets could go 0-16, you don't even have faith that they're even going to do anything with these draft picks. That's how bad it is. And, of course, the Dolphins are free falling. They might fire Mike McDaniel. They might bench Tua Tagovailoa, they did. And they're the team that the Jets lost. Their one win this season was against us. So this team is absolutely pathetic. And this season can't get over with quick enough. But that does it for this edition of the Kevin Blekicki Show. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to follow me on social media, you can follow me on all platforms at Kevin Blekicki. Thank you, and we will see you again next week.